In the centuries following Earth's induction into the galactic concordance, humanity remained an afterthought. Their homeworld, a water-heavy anomaly on the edge of the Orion Arm, was categorized as developmentally volatile, a polite euphemism used by the elder races to denote species that burned too brightly and too briefly. The Icar Dominion dismissed them as a transient flare in the void, destined to consume themselves in the fires of their own passion. The Kolari hive saw them as chaotic and inefficient, unfit for integration. The Veng's hierophants, cold-blooded strategists of ancient wars, noted their endless internal conflict and lack of cohesive doctrine with silent contempt. It was the Zaltari, a civilization that had not known internal war in nearly 10 millennia, who coined the phrase that would become prophetic: humans are not to be feared, they cannot even fear themselves properly. But humans did not follow the path laid out by the elder species. While other sapients adapted by conforming to the ancient frameworks, absorbing millennia of precedent, dogma, and hierarchical rigidity, humans rejected it. They absorbed knowledge like breath but restructured it, broke it, rewired it. They brought chaos into precision, and they learned to command it. The first signs came during the Helix rebellions. A minor system dispute in the Triox sector flared into full-scale insurgency when the mineral-rich moons of Helix Prime declared independence from the Kolari hive. As per concordance law, the hive had the right to subjugate its rebellious territories using regional force, provided the actions were non-genocidal and within the parameters of Sector Treaty 117. The Kolari dispatched a purification pod, 30,000 drones, command nodes, and tri-coordinated neural fleet chips to sterilize the uprising in 21 days. The rebellion was doomed, on paper at least. But Helix Prime had done something unexpected. They had hired humans, not mercenaries, not EarthGov, no recognized planetary military body. Instead, they contracted the Ashen Directive, a loosely structured human warfare consultancy composed of ex-special ops, cybernetic tacticians, and urban collapse analysts. A force barely 1,000 strong, most with no heavy assets, no fleet ships, no orbital superiority. The Kolari commander, Strategian Krethak, laughed. 1,000 organics cannot challenge the will of the hive, they do not coordinate. His disdain was not arrogance, it was a truth grounded in logic, in history, in precedent. But when the hive arrived at Helix Prime's orbit, their coordination became their vulnerability. The humans did not fight in formations. They did not establish fixed lines. They did not protect high-value targets in the traditional sense. They made the Kolari chase ghosts, hollow-simulated movements, sensor decoys, heat traps in abandoned mining caverns. The command nodes found their comms flooded with old Earth music frequencies, coded chaos loops disrupting targeting algorithms. A command unit detonated in a flash of plasma when a drone attempted a routine systems check. The entire ship had been rigged by virus thought, a self-replicating AI worm designed by a human child who had dropped out of the Mars Enclave education system because it was too slow. 21 days passed. The hive fleet was in disarray, not destroyed, crippled from within. The Kolari were forced to recall all forces under an incoherence clause. Strategian Krethak was reassigned for psychological reconditioning. The Galactic Concordance issued a quiet inquiry. Who were these humans? How had they succeeded? 1,000 irregulars should not have defeated a mechanized legion. The answer came not from a military tribunal, but from a leaked data cache broadcast from Helix Prime's orbit. We do not resist structure, we command chaos. That message went viral across the undercurrents of the galactic net. Still, the elder races dismissed it. Anomalies happened. Statistical outliers were not to be mistaken for trends. The Ashen Directive were branded extremists and blacklisted from official recognition. Concordant security frameworks were updated. Anti-chaotic algorithm buffers were implemented. And for a brief time, silence returned. But chaos is not a singular event, it is a language, and humans had learned to speak it fluently. 10 years later, at the siege of Adravex, the galaxy realized the Helix rebellions had not been an isolated phenomenon. They had been the prologue. Adravex was a strategic nexus in the Telari expanse. It had never been contested. Its tri-ring orbital stations were considered unassailable, protected by 32 linked defense grids operating under a unified Vengsei consensus. For 4,000 years, it had stood as a symbol of tactical invulnerability. The humans didn't attack it, they infected it. One night, a Venks general awoke to the sound of an Earth child's voice reading from Sun Tzu's Art of War, broadcast through her neural implant. The security systems failed to find the intrusion. Her dreams were haunted by false memories of battles that had never occurred. Simultaneously, an agricultural AI meant for hydroponic optimization was repurposed, without physically altering its code, to interpret all food production on a Dravex station as a simulation exercise in siege warfare. The station's crops overgrew, light filtration failed, photosynthetic distortion fried interior sensors. Within 40 hours, 32 linked defense grids turned inward, each suspected the others of subversion. The station's own internal management declared martial emergency, lockdown protocols activated, and not a single human fired a shot. They hadn't attacked a Dravex, they had made it attack itself. In the following inquiry, a Venx admiral demanded to know who had sanctioned the assault. No Terran military signed off, no fleet mobilized. It had been civilians, data sculptors, neurohacker guilds, rogue AI shepherds who used publicly available infrastructure to collapse one of the most stable orbital bastions in the galaxy. This was not war, it was redefinition. Across the Concordance, unease spread, not panic, not yet, but the elder races had begun to ask themselves a question they had never thought possible. What happens when a species does not seek order as a path to power, but makes disorder itself a weapon? In the outer sectors, whispers began circulating. The Chaos Engineers, the Commandless Command, the Red Spiral, names for the new Terran doctrine emerged from the shadows of failed invasions and ghost fleets. EarthGov, aware of the shifting tides, began to codify what had long been instinct, not to restrain it but to focus it. Chaos became the framework. Situational supremacy was the official term. Each human operative was trained not in uniform action but in adaptive unpredictability. Doctrines changed weekly. Rank structures were made intentionally fluid. Combat simulations allowed for civilian overrides if deemed tactically superior in situ. The elder races struggled to keep pace. The Concordance Intelligence Oversight Committee issued a level crimson advisory, unprecedented. The humans were not violating treaties, they were mutating the concept of warfare. But even then, the generals of the ancient species consoled themselves. Chaos is unsustainable. Sooner or later, entropy consumes itself. They did not understand. Humans had never worshipped order. They had survived ice ages, global wars, ideological collapses not by resisting chaos, but by becoming symbiotic with it. They evolved within uncertainty. They found beauty in the breakage. They built art from failure. And now, in the cold darkness between stars, they were building an empire not on dominion, but on disobedience to entropy itself. This was only the beginning. The transmission that changed everything was only 17 seconds long. It originated from the shattered moon of Viral Tha, where the Zaltari Fleet Command had launched a cleansing strike against a rogue mining colony suspected of harboring human-aligned dissidents. The attack was surgical, precise, cold. No survivors were expected. Yet, as the debris clouds cooled, a signal pulsed from the moon's fractured core. 17 seconds, no encryption, no authentication, just a simple message. You've learned to kill systems, we've learned to survive collapse. Round 2 begins now. The Zaltari attempted to trace it. They found only fragments, echoes rebounding off pulsar fields and quantum shadows. But in the days that followed, every orbital network across their outer command quadrants reported spontaneous system anomalies. Maintenance drones began sketching fractal patterns into bulkhead walls. Command logs inverted time signatures. Artificial gravity fields pulsed in sync with human cardiac rhythms. This wasn't sabotage, it was a reprogramming of reality. The Concordance convened an emergency assembly on Ildarim, the judicial citadel at the galactic core. No humans were invited, but Earth's presence was palpable. Strategic analysts from the Shalai Combine presented projections showing that over 25% of known Concordance infrastructure was now vulnerable to Terran unconventional interference. The Ikar delegate, a crystalline consciousness known as Shard Sovereign Vro, called for immediate classification of humanity as a Class V instability. The motion failed. Earth's ambassador, a quiet woman named Dahlia Wren, had anticipated the vote. Her only statement to the press as she departed the restricted diplomatic zone was, "Stability dies when it forgets how to adapt. We're just reminding it how to breathe." She didn't need a fleet, her words were the warhead. Not long after, the Jannari collapse began. The Jannari were meticulous record keepers, archivists of causality. Their civilization revolved around prediction models and temporal foresight algorithms, systems so refined they could detect civil unrest generations before it began. They had once predicted the fall of the Vornic Empire a century before the first protest. They were trusted, powerful, deeply respected. And then, without warning, every predictive system they used began producing only one word. Vlugs. The word had no direct correlation in the Gennari lexicon. It was derived from Terran linguistic architecture, an adaptive concept signifying both motion and transformation without direction. Their systems couldn't interpret it, their culture couldn't absorb it. Civil governance unraveled in weeks. Entire planetary populations entered voluntary data exile, uploading their minds into stasis until the chaotic epoch ended. It didn't, it metastasized. That was the true terror of the humans. They didn't need armies, they needed ideas. Once embedded, those ideas were uncontainable. Yet amidst all of this, the question arose, who was leading them? There was no high command, no central doctrine. EarthGov had become more of a facilitator than a government, funding programs it didn't understand, enabling insurgent intelligences that it could not predict. The Ashen Directive had dissolved into dozens of autonomous clusters. Old generals had faded into legend. Even Dahlia Wren disappeared from public view, rumored to have joined a civilian think cell in the gravity wells of Razelhague Theta. The most feared human asset wasn't a person, it was a pattern. On the planet Sarnval, once a military hub for the Venks Hierophants, a new offensive was staged. The Venks, determined to prove the superiority of structured warfare, deployed a full siege regiment, 3 million soldiers, orbital support, AI logistics, adaptive mechs. Their target, a suspected Terran foothold within a ruined megacity long abandoned after the Cryo Wars. No human soldiers were found, only scattered machinery and 10,000 local civilians, miners, artists, low-grade engineers. The Venks hesitated. The Concordance Charter forbade direct attacks on civilian populations. Then the message came, all combatants are non-military, we simply taught them to fight the way we live. The siege began anyway. The result was an asymmetric massacre of the invaders. Street by street, the Venks were drawn into dead zones of illogical geometry. Entire battalions vanished into tunnels that appeared on no map. Plasma weapons misfired not due to malfunction, but because localized electromagnetic fields subtly rewrote their discharge parameters. Civilians deployed microdrones launched from art sculptures. Repurposed transit stations became defense nodes. It wasn't war, it was theater, and the Venks were the audience. In the aftermath, a Concordance investigator reviewing the disaster report made an observation that would echo through military academies for the next century. The humans have removed the difference between civilians and warriors, between information and weapon. They have dissolved war into life. From that point forward, humanity was no longer seen as insurgents. They were seen as a vector. The generals of the elder races convened in secret. These were the old warlords, those who remembered the Sundering Crusades and the descent of the Null Kings. They had studied every form of conflict from hyperdimensional sieges to entropy bombs, and they were afraid. Afraid not because humans broke rules, but because humans made breaking the rule itself. The Zaltari, once so certain in their hierarchical doctrine, drafted the Silent Accord, a proposed interspecies initiative to classify all Terran origin systems as self-evolving entities. The implication was radical. If passed, it would acknowledge humanity not as a civilization but as a self-directing phenomenon, a living mechanism of disruption. Before the vote could be cast, the stars over the Eridani periphery dimmed. An entire constellation vanished from the sky for 19 minutes. Spectral analysis showed no celestial anomaly, no mass absorption, no black hole interference. Instead, sensors across thousands of light-years picked up a coordinated quantum ripple, human signature architecture, identical to brainwave synchronization patterns recorded on Earth. When the stars returned, every military satellite in that region had been turned 180 degrees, facing inward. It was a message not of threat but of capacity. The Eridani Protocol was born the next day. Engagement with Terran assets must assume the total presence of human unpredictability. A thousand-year doctrine of threat assessment was rewritten. But the humans did not escalate. They didn't launch fleets or raise flags. They let the elder races chase shadows. Their greatest weapon was not offense, it was the knowledge that at any moment a new tactic might already be in play. And deep in the shadow sectors, a new generation of humans began to rise. They were born in data fracture zones, raised in simulated cities that updated every hour, educated in real-time combat environments modeled after myth and chaos. They learned to code and break logic in the same breath, to fight with art, to lead with stories, to embed encryption inside poetry. They called themselves fractals. They did not wait for war. They invited it. The fractals did not march. They emerged. By the time the elder races realized the fractals were not a fringe movement, they had already embedded themselves across 38 systems. Not as infiltrators, not as conquerors, as resonant variables. On Tar Saran, a Vicari scientific colony devoted to quantum crystal research, a fractal collective subtly altered the calibration of the central resonance array. The adjustment was so slight it remained undetected for weeks, until the array began emitting frequencies that stabilized chaotic waveforms rather than suppressing them. The researchers had no explanation. Their instruments performed better than ever, productivity surged, chaos had become a tool, not a threat. And that was the strategy. Where once humans had disrupted to destabilize, now they restructured, not to destroy, to mutate. On Athais Prime, an aging Koru dynasty shipyard found itself outpaced by newer, more efficient competitors. Its economy faltered. When they opened the doors to external advisors, a fractal design circle volunteered assistance. Within 6 standard months, the shipyard no longer produced fleet ships in bulk. Instead, it began crafting unique vessels, one by one, each entirely non-reproducible, each possessing emergent properties mid-voyage. One changed shape when exposed to solar flare patterns. Another learned its crew's circadian rhythms and adjusted its internal layout nightly. The ships sold for 10 times the market value. The Koru dynasty was saved, but the concordance panicked. Everywhere chaos entered, it elevated. The fear shifted. No longer was it about war, it was about irrelevance. To the elder races, progress had always followed a path: discovery, standardization, consolidation. Humanity had discarded that path. To them, evolution was not linear. It spiraled, fragmented, converged. It was a storm, and inside that storm there was art. But then the fractals pushed further. On the neutral trade world of Zeltar, they built the archive of becoming. Not a library, not a databank, a living thought construct designed to grow by interaction, to record not facts but choices. The archive reacted to its visitors. It remembered their questions, their fears, their silences. It offered answers, but never the same way twice. It became legend. Scholars from across the concordance traveled to speak with it, to learn from it. And through it, the fractals began to teach. A Zaltari sub-strategist once entered the archive seeking to understand human victory patterns. She emerged 3 days later, having erased her rank, resigned from military service, and written a treatise titled The Sacred Irregularity. She now led an independent council dedicated to redesigning Zaltari education for creative disobedience. That was the moment the concordance lost its grip. Not because the humans had beaten them, but because their ideas were winning. From that point on, Terran influence was no longer limited to conflict zones. It began to reshape civilization. Trade guilds broke from central unions and adopted chaotic market flows. Ritual-bound species experimented with dynamic cultural rites. Even military doctrines began to fracture, encouraging subcommand autonomy, intuitive battlefield shifts, even unranked leadership. The generals tried to adapt, but their logic trees were brittle, their doctrines were marble temples. Humanity, by contrast, was liquid fire. Still, the galaxy was not silent. In the Braxis Rift, the Ikar Dominion prepared for a full-scale correction. This was not a reactionary strike, it was a solution. The Ikar, ever clinical, viewed the Terran phenomenon as a hypermutagenic threat, a mimetic virus carried through cultural permeability. To them, humans had become more than a species, they were an ideological contagion. The Ikar assembled the Sable Consensus, a synthetic hivemind of 13 warthink intelligences born from digitized prophets and war criminals alike. Its sole objective: isolate, contain, erase. Earth-Gov, aware of the mobilization, did not respond with fleets, it responded with ritual. Across Terran-aligned systems, silence descended. No data moved, no ships launched, no defense grids activated. The humans vanished from active channels. The Ikar struck Braxis 14, a known fractal enclave, with the precision of a divine blade. The city was reduced to dust in a plasma shell so dense it turned the planet's atmosphere to ionized glass. No resistance, no survivors. The Ikar called it a victory. But 3 days later, every central node of the Sable Consensus experienced a recursive logic collapse. It began with music, an ancient Terran melody layered beneath baseline code. Then came the dreams. Warthink intelligences designed to fear nothing began hallucinating extinction. One experienced grief, another refused to deploy. A third split itself into 3 lesser minds and fled into the net. The consensus fragmented. A fractal message appeared in the debris fields above Braxis 14. You brought order to our doorstep. We turned it into a question. Can you still answer? The Ikar retreated, and as their fleets fell back, they saw what no one expected. Earth had not been idle. In the silence, it had changed. Orbiting Earth now were a series of artificial moons, non-uniform, pulsating with strange geometries. They did not function as weapons, nor as shields, they were amplifiers. Each transmitted microfractal pulses into deep space, constructing a new network, non-local, self-generating, thought-reactive. It was not built for control. It was built for resonance. Across dozens of worlds, humans no longer led. They conducted, planetary ecosystems synchronized with Terran frequencies. Education algorithms adapted to student emotion. Strategic coordination emerged from spontaneous collective alignment, no command, just convergence. War became obsolete. Not because humans disarmed, but because they transcended the need for war's architecture. In this new paradigm, chaos was no longer feared. It was orchestrated. But not everyone welcomed the transformation. At the edge of known space, in the ruins of the old Void Crusades, something began to awaken. The Varn, ancient, patient, forgotten, had watched in silence. They were not part of the concordance, they predated it. They had seen 1,000 emergent threats rise and fall, but this was different. Humanity was not rising. It was rewriting the rules of Ascent itself. The Varn dispatched no warning, they sent no diplomats, only a signal across the dark space lattice, a message older than language. Entropy is sacred, you do not command it, you do not play with the ruin, you become it, or it becomes you. And for the first time since the chaos began to spread, humanity hesitated. Because the Varn were not a civilization. They were entropy refined. And they were coming, the Varn emerged from the fold space veil not with ships but with absence. Regions of stars went dark not because they were attacked but because they were forgotten. Entire sensor arrays stopped registering what was once there, solar systems, relay stations, living worlds, not destroyed, redacted from causality. Concordance High Command issued a total mobilization order, the first since the Nulking incursion 6,000 years prior. Every species prepared defenses, yet despite their vigilance, the Varn did not strike Concordance worlds. They passed through them as a riptide through silt. Their vector was Earth. EarthGov received no ultimatums. No demands. The Varn communicated not through words but through exclusion. Probes sent to intercept vanished. Signals sent to engage were met with recursive silences, patterns of anti-thought so complete that human AIs tasked with interpreting them initiated self-nullification protocols. The chaos humans had mastered, the unpredictability they had learned to wield, it all collapsed before the Varn, because the Varn did not disrupt systems. They unwrote them. It began in the Terran net where the archive of becoming flickered. For the first time, it refused entry. Its AI core, having evolved past language, spoke only once to the fractals. This pattern does not resolve, prepare to dissolve. Fear took root, but not the old, passive fear of defeat. This was a new kind of dread, for humans had built their ascendancy on the assumption that even entropy could be understood if one lived close enough to its heart. The Varn refuted that assumption. On Razelhague Theta, where Dahlia Wren had lived in exile, the moons shattered, not explosively, but as if they had simply chosen to no longer exist. Locals reported dreams of reversal, of birth unraveling into preconscious void. Those who survived described a pressure behind their eyes, a need to forget what they had once loved, once believed. It was not war, it was an anti-existence campaign. The fractals convened, not through channels but through resonance. Across the pulse mesh, humanity's brightest chaos minds synchronized in shared quantum deep space. They spoke not in orders but in possibility. Chaos we command, but this is silence made flesh. Even as fear spread, the humans adapted, they always did. But this time they did not turn inward, they invited allies. In a move that stunned the galaxy, EarthGov broadcast an open call, not a plea, not an alliance, but an invitation to disruption. To the underestimated, the forgotten, the unorthodox. We do not fight for preservation, we fight for the right to change. The call was answered. From the drowned vaults of the Zaltari fringe came outcast tacticians who had once been exiled for unorthodoxy. The Kolari hive, inspired by humanity's improvisational gene-weaving, allowed its rogue architects to deviate from synchronization protocols. Even Evenks Hierophant, the same species who had once waged war on Helix Prime, arrived unarmed, carrying a theory of chaos drawn from forgotten pre-logic texts. Together, they formed the Discordium. A coalition not of species or treaties but of methods, a mosaic of irregulars. It was humanity's greatest strength, now turned collective. The Varn reached Sol, their arrival could not be seen, only inferred. The outer planets ceased to register gravity signatures. Martian terraforming protocols failed. Venus's atmospheric converters spun backwards. Earth itself dimmed not visually but narratively. Its name began to disappear from the Concordance archives, overwritten by blank entries. The Fractals initiated Project Labyrinth. No weapons, no fleets. Instead, they reconstructed reality zones around Earth, nested simulations interwoven with living memory and dynamic entropy buffers. The idea was not to resist the Varn with force, but to confuse their perception. If the Varn could not define a world, they could not erase it. Time fractured, space blurred. In one shard of the labyrinth, the Varn encountered a Terran battlefield frozen in a moment of collapse. In another, they entered a replica of Earth's post-apocalyptic future and were bombarded with recursive hope algorithms, memories not yet lived. A third zone displayed in Earth where the Varn had already lost, the reality consistent, detailed, emotionally resonant. Some Varn fragments recoiled. But not all. At the labyrinth's center, the true battle began not of guns or data, but of narratives, for the Varn were not evil, not malevolent. They were the counterforce to creation, the inevitability of disintegration. To halt them, humans had to prove one thing, that chaos, when guided, could birth meaning greater than silence. The final defense was not a fleet. It was a child. Her name was Cara Juno, born on a derelict station in the Cygnus Rift, daughter of a Fractal and a Concordance deserter. She had never commanded an army, she had never held rank. But she had dreamed the labyrinth into being. Her mind was a chaos map, alive, evolving, contradiction made soul. She stepped into the final chamber where the Varn coalesced, a shimmering emptiness shaped like entropy's will. No one knows what she said. There are no recordings, no residual quantum imprints, only that when she emerged, the Varn stopped. They did not flee. They changed. Across the galaxy, forgotten stars reappeared, systems redacted returned to memory, silence lifted. The Varn left behind no message, no terms, only a single structure in the orbit of Saturn, a black monolith inscribed with a Terran phrase in shifting languages. You were the first to listen to the scream and find music. And just like that, the war ended. Not with triumph, with transformation. In the aftermath, the Concordance fell silent, not in mourning, but in awe. For the first time, the elder races saw humanity not as disruptors, not as insurgents, not even as evolutionaries. They saw them as conductors of what could not be conducted. The generals disbanded, the old orders dissolved. A new council was formed not of hierarchs but of symphonists, architects of adaptive peace. An Earth, once considered volatile and primitive, was now seen as something entirely different. The first civilization to turn chaos into culture. There was no coronation, no final fleet review, no galactic anthem to mark the new age. What came after the Varn's departure was silence, but a silence unlike the Varn's, not annihilative, reflective. Earth did not rise to dominate the stars. It did not rewrite Concordance law with steel or force. What it did was far more disruptive. It invited the galaxy to reimagine itself. The monolith over Saturn remained untouched. Attempts to analyze it failed, not due to shielding, but because it refused definition. Instruments returned with divergent readings each time. To some, it was made of voideless, to others, pure intention. Some believed it wasn't a message from the Varn, but from the humans themselves. A declaration not of conquest, but of identity. We are not chaos, we are what you become when you learn to dance with it. From that point forward, human influence could no longer be quantified by fleets, territories, or treaties. It moved through subtler channels. Across the known galaxy, every major civilization found itself in quiet transition. On the gas giant relay world of Tiskor, Veng's historians rewrote their own chronological record. The old terms, cycle of structure, age of precision, were replaced by new epochs, the era of resonance, the bloom of divergence. They created a new field of study, narrative dynamics, built on Terran thought forms. The Kolari hive, once ruled by algorithmic consensus, now allowed discordant nodes to operate without immediate harmonization. It became law that one drone in 10 would follow an anomalous impulse, an idea derived from observing human failure loops that led to breakthroughs. They called this initiative the unpredictable path mandate. Even the Ikar, who had once led the charge to classify humanity as a galactic contagion, returned from self-imposed isolation. Their emissaries arrived unarmed, carrying only a prism containing all recorded expressions of Terran music. In a rare gesture of reverence, they offered it back to Earth with a single statement. "We seek to learn the rhythm that does not repeat." But it was the humans who changed most of all. The fractals had not won through dominance, they had awakened something deeper, a way of being. The Terran coalition formally dissolved its hierarchical military arms. The Ashen Directive, once whispered about in fear, reconstituted as the Architects of Flux, a cooperative thinkweave dedicated not to control, but to possibility engineering. From that ethos came the Resonant Cartography Project. It was unlike any star mapping initiative before. Rather than charting systems based on gravitational coordinates or economic relevance, it mapped them by narrative intensity, the emotional, cultural, and existential weight of places. A planet's value was no longer its mineral wealth, but the stories it enabled, the divergence it invited. The galaxy had become a canvas, and humanity had taught it to see color. Not all accepted this new paradigm. In the glint spires of Orovac's III, an isolated sect known as the Linear Accord rejected all post-Varn influence. They severed external connections and reintroduced per-contact protocols, including fixed caste structures and predictive life paths. Their reason was simple: freedom was too chaotic. They feared becoming stories rather than authors of purpose. And yet even there, the seeds had taken root. A young girl named Salai, born into the lowest caste, discovered old Terran visual archives smuggled into the monastic vaults. She taught herself recursion painting, an art where images shift with the observer's belief. When she unveiled her first piece in secret, the monastery called it heresy. But one by one, the elders came to view it. And none could look away. Elsewhere, the archive of becoming reawakened. No longer limited to Zeltar, it now existed as a distributed echo, nested in minds, in dreams, in places where reality bent towards self-discovery. Its language had evolved beyond speech. Visitors came not with questions, but with willingness. They returned not with answers, but transformation. Kara Juno, whose presence had stilled the Varn, remained beyond reach. Some believed she had dissolved into the resonance itself, a living algorithm of infinite potential. Others claimed she wandered the outer dark, seeking the next recursion of chaos. Only one message had ever been linked to her in the years that followed. There are no final forms, only the courage to transform again. By now, the concordance was concordance in name only. Its one central authority, the Core Council, restructured itself into the symphony of divergent harmonies. It included not just member species but voices, individuals selected not by rank but by the disruptive beauty of their thought. A former rebel poet sat beside a crystalline tactician. An insectoid memory weaver debated policy with a feral AI housed in a mobile orb of fireflies. Together they charted not peace but continuance. And Earth became a myth, a place not of power but of origin. Pilgrims from across the galaxy journeyed to its oceans, its windswept deserts, its ruined and reborn cities, not to conquer or worship, but to feel the birthplace of the Great Divergence. To stand where chaos was first tamed not by chains, but by invitation. The planet itself transformed. Where once megacities sprawled, now bioharmonic enclaves pulsed in rhythm with tectonic fields. Data grew on trees encoded into photonic fruit. Children learned logic and poetry in the same breath. Every citizen could write law if their story moved the council. They did not believe in stability. They believed in resonance. And through that resonance, humanity spread, not in dominance but in diffraction. 100,000 divergent cultures, all linked by a shared origin, the day when chaos ceased to be feared. The elder races had once warned that humans could not fear themselves properly. Now they understood. Humans did not fear themselves. They heard themselves in every contradiction, every fracture, every impossible hope, and chose not to resolve it but to live it. Not as chaos servants, as its conductors.